What's the most disgusting, shocking you have read on the Epstein files? In our small Baltic country, the Epstein files felt far away until a familiar local name started circulating. An event organizer, always pictured at charity galas and cultural shows, the kind of couple everyone seemed to know. Then a rumor hardened into something colder. Documents reportedly showed extensive communication between that couple and Epstein. The details spread fast because the country is small. People didn't argue about politics or gossip. They asked one question: who was close enough to him to matter? That's when the allegation landed like a stone. They were said to have sent photographs of young girls connected to a ballet school where they helped manage things. No sensational descriptions, just the kind of claim that makes parents freeze and replay every memory of drop-offs, rehearsals, and backstage corridors. Phones lit up. Group chats filled with nervous questions. Some parents pulled their children from classes without explaining why. Others didn't, because the alternative, believing it, felt impossible. Teachers avoided eye contact. Everyone waited for an official statement, and the silence made the rumors louder. Then another reported detail surfaced and changed the tone from maybe to how. The wife was allegedly named as a beneficiary in Epstein's will, set to receive $3 million. $3 million. A number so specific, it sounded less like gossip and more like paper evidence. People started asking what kind of relationship earns a place in a will, and what kind of secrets come with it. When authorities announced an investigation into suspected human trafficking, it didn't feel like a twist. It felt like the inevitable moment the curtain finally moved. The scary part wasn't just the allegation, it was realizing how close a global scandal could sit inside a familiar town, behind polite smiles and public photos. That night, walking past a dance studio with its lights still on, I understood something simple. The most frightening stories aren't the ones that happen somewhere else. They're the ones that happen near you, while everyone pretends they can't see. Next story. The first thing I noticed wasn't a name, it was a black bar. I expected the usual chaos. Hot takes, conspiracy threads, people arguing over screenshots. Instead, page after page seemed stamped with the same shape, thick redactions hiding certain names. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe it was standard. Maybe it was to protect privacy. Then I noticed what wasn't hidden. People pointed out something that made my stomach sink. In places, victims' identities and personal details appeared less protected than the people accused of harming them. I went back and reread, slower, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the pattern didn't feel random. The redactions weren't evenly applied, they were selective. I tried to talk myself into explanations, ongoing investigations, legal liability, due process. But the longer I stared at the black bars, the less they felt like procedure and the more they felt like a shield. A commenter wrote a line that sounded compassionate at first. There are still living people named in those files and we need to keep them protected. For 1 second, I thought they meant victims. Then, someone replied with the twist that made everything snap into focus. You didn't think they meant the victims, did you? That's when the redaction stopped being editing and became part of the story. Each black bar turned into a question. Who insisted this name stay hidden? Who benefits from silence? Why is the system careful with one identity and careless with another? By the end, my anger wasn't only about what the documents suggested. It was about what the redactions implied. An upside-down protection order where the vulnerable are exposed and the powerful are obscured. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Every black bar becomes a door you're not allowed to open, and the suspense is knowing someone on the other side still controls the lock. Next story. It started with one comment. That email is the worst thing I've read. Curiosity did what it always does. It pushed past my better judgment. I found the page people were discussing and read the message carefully. What made it disturbing wasn't graphic detail, it was how casual it sounded. Like the writer was joking, like harm had become normal conversation, like the person typing had forgotten they were talking about a child and not an object. Then I saw what turned the whole thing into a cliffhanger. The sender's name was redacted. Suddenly, the message wasn't just disgusting, it was a locked room mystery. Who wrote it? Why was that person protected? If transparency is the goal, why hide the identity behind the most revealing line? The thread filled with arguments, but none of them soothed the basic question. Some people said it was legal caution. Others said it was to avoid defamation. Others insisted it was proof the wrong people were being shielded. What made it feel suspenseful was the uncertainty. The black bar could cover anyone, a stranger, a respected professional, a public figure, someone you've heard praised on television. Redaction turns accountability into a guessing game, and guessing is poison. Your mind won't stop searching. Who had access? Who wrote with that kind of confidence? Who assumed they'd never face consequences? I kept scrolling, hoping someone would explain it away. Nobody did. The anger only sharpened because the redaction didn't protect a victim. It protected a speaker. It protected a voice that sounded too comfortable. When I finally closed the page, the message still echoed. Not the words themselves, but what the black bar meant. Even when the truth is written down, someone still decides who remains unnamed. And that's the part that feels most dangerous. Not just what happened, but how easy it is to hide the people who helped make it happen. Next story. Some details shout, others whisper. The one that haunted me was a single line. A trap door inside Epstein's house leading to the ocean. At first, I assumed it was internet exaggeration, but the way people reacted wasn't theatrical. It was weary, like they'd reached the point where nothing shocked them anymore, only saddened them. That made me pause, because a trapdoor isn't just a quirky feature, it's intention, it's secrecy built into architecture. I tried to picture it and my mind wouldn't stop. A polished floor with a seam you don't notice, a hinge hidden under a rug, a latch that clicks softly, then the drop, down into a narrow passage, salt air rising up, the ocean waiting below. It didn't feel like a house feature, it felt like a route, and routes have purposes. A trapdoor suggests you're planning for movement you don't want seen. It suggests arrivals and exits that bypass the obvious cameras, the driveway, the front gate. It suggests a place designed not only to impress guests, but to conceal what you don't want guests, or neighbors, or law enforcement to understand. That's where the suspense creeps in. If a trapdoor exists, what else exists? What other design choices were made to support secrecy? What other parts of the house were built around control, not comfort? I kept scrolling, hoping someone would say it was a misunderstanding. Instead, the replies were people pulling back. That's enough for me. Nothing is scarier. No debates, no jokes, just a collective step away from the screen, like everyone had opened the wrong door in a dark hallway. I closed my laptop and looked around my own ordinary room. No hidden hinges, no secret exits, and yet I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, someone built a trapdoor because they believed they'd always have a way out. The unsettling question isn't whether it's real. The unsettling question is how many other ways out still exist for the people we can't name, because a black bar is sitting on top of them. Next story, the comment was one sentence, and it hit harder than any headline. The worst thing they'd seen was a girl's diary written in code. A diary. That detail forced me to imagine something I didn't want to imagine. A child trying to record what was happening, but knowing the truth wasn't safe in plain language. Adults keep journals to process feelings. A child writing in code is different. That isn't creativity. It's self-defense. What made it suspenseful wasn't the diary's content. It was the reason the diary needed a disguise. What kind of world teaches a kid that honesty can get you hurt? What kind of fear makes you encrypt your own life? People explained that the cipher wasn't sophisticated. It didn't have to be. It just had to stop a casual reader. That made it worse. It suggested the diary wasn't meant to hide from experts. It was meant to hide from the people who had access to her room, her bag, her private space, the people who could punish her for telling the truth. That's where it became painfully relatable, even for someone who's never faced anything like that. Everyone knows the instinct to hide something personal, an embarrassing thought, a private worry, a secret you're not ready to share. But this wasn't, I don't want my family to tease me. This was, I'm not safe. I kept thinking about what diaries are supposed to hold. Small hopes, ordinary days, silly complaints, and then I thought about the cost of replacing normal childhood pages with coded survival notes. A kid shouldn't need a cipher to exist. The final twist is the simplest. The diary was found. The code didn't protect her forever. Someone eventually read it. And that's when the story becomes a test, not of a child's cleverness, but of adults' courage. Because once you decode a child's truth, you can't pretend you didn't understand. The only question left is whether anyone finally chose to act. Next story. After the coded diary was mentioned, I thought I'd move on, but someone did something that pulled me back. They explained how the code worked. 2 rows of letters, a simple pattern, down, then up and over, repeated until a hidden sentence becomes readable. The explanation was almost casual, like describing a puzzle. And that casualness is what made it chilling, because this wasn't a puzzle someone invented for fun. It was a child's method for hiding the truth. The suspense arrived the moment I realized the code could be solved. When a cipher becomes readable, the words behind it feel like they're about to step into the room. I hesitated, not because the pattern was hard, but because decoding felt like crossing a line. Once you understand, you're responsible for what you know. And the code's simplicity made it more human. A child didn't have time to create something complex. She created something she could remember while tired, scared, or rushed. That detail said more than any official phrasing. It suggested a life lived in constant calculation. What can I write? Where can I hide it? How do I keep it from being found? I didn't actually decode anything. I couldn't make myself do it. The point wasn't solving. The point was seeing strangers discuss a child's survival technique as if it were an interesting detail, while others begged for accountability, and others warned each other to stop reading for their own sanity. That collision, curiosity, outrage, exhaustion, felt like the real story. A child built a tiny security system out of letters, and adults are still arguing about whether to expose the people responsible. When I finally closed the page, the suspense didn't resolve. It sharpened into a question I couldn't shake. If a child had to encrypt her diary to feel safe, how many adults saw the plain truth, no code needed, and still chose to look away? A cipher can hide words. It can't hide the failure that made the cipher necessary. Next story, I kept waiting for the moment the story turned into consequences. When people say files were released, you expect a chain reaction. Investigations, arrests, court dates. You expect that documented evidence forces action. So I read the discussions thinking I was watching the beginning of accountability. Instead, I watched the familiar trick: noise without impact. Comment after comment came back to the same blunt reality. No charges filed, no sweeping action, no justice that matched the scale of what people were reading. The suspense wasn't in what the documents suggested. It was in what didn't happen afterward. Each day without action started to feel like a message. The rules are different for the powerful. I tried to comfort myself with the reasonable explanations. Cases take time. Prosecutors move carefully. Due process matters. But the thread kept circling a darker thought. What if delay isn't caution? What if it's protection? People demanded trials. People demanded names. People demanded to know why certain identities were covered up while others weren't. And under all of it was the same exhausted question: how can so much be public and still nothing meaningful happens? That frustration is relatable in a smaller way. Everyone knows the feeling of filing a complaint that goes nowhere, watching a well-connected person handle it privately, being told, "We're looking into it," until the attention fades. It's the helplessness of shouting into a padded room. By the end, I realized the most shocking part wasn't a single document. It was the absence of an ending. The story didn't resolve, it just continued, open and unfinished. And the longer it stays unfinished, the more it teaches people to stop watching. That's the real suspense. Not what's inside the files, but whether the world will ever produce a conclusion that looks like justice. Because if the only outcome is more outrage and no consequences, then the system isn't broken. It's performing exactly as designed, and we've been waiting for that ending for years. Next story. The political angle hit like a match in dry grass. Someone said the fallout in the UK could be huge, not because the Prime Minister was named, but because he employed someone with connections to Epstein. One detail, and suddenly the conversation shifted from documents to power. I watched the thread turn into a tug-of-war. Some people demanded resignations, others demanded proof, others argued about what connections even meant. But the suspense wasn't in the arguing. It was in the possibility that a single hire could become a crack in the wall. That's what made it relatable. Everyone knows how one decision can shadow everything else. You work with someone, trust them, and then one day you learn something that makes you replay every memory differently. You wonder what you missed. You wonder what you ignored because it was easier not to ask questions. Here, the questions were louder because the stakes were national. If a leader surrounded himself with people tied, directly or indirectly, to a scandal like this, what does that say about judgment, about vetting, about whether the elite live inside circles where warnings get treated as inconvenient rumors? The public doesn't need a direct accusation to feel betrayed. Sometimes proximity is enough. Sometimes the real fear isn't, "he did it," but, "how close was this world to the people in charge?" Because proximity suggests access, and access suggests the same old protection, the ability to keep problems quiet. As the debate grew, it started to feel like a thriller, where the villain isn't one person, but a system of connections. Doors open for the well-connected, doubts get brushed off as politics, and when accountability finally arrives, it often arrives behind closed doors, where the public can't see who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. That's the suspense that lingers, not knowing whether the connection is a distraction or a doorway, and knowing either one can still reveal the same rot in the walls. Next story. The more I read, the less it looked like one bad person, and the more it looked like a machine. That realization didn't come from a single revelation. It came from the pattern. People pointing to failures in law enforcement, failures in finance, failures in media, failures in social circles that treat warnings like background noise. Every time someone asked, "How did this go on for so long?" another piece clicked into place. Because it doesn't go on without help. The suspense came from tracing the invisible chain. If something terrible is happening, someone notices. A staff member hears an odd instruction. A driver sees an unfamiliar passenger. A neighbor notices strange comings and goings. A bank employee sees unusual transactions. A journalist hears the same rumor twice. Someone always sees something. So where does the something go? Who is the first person to decide it's safer to look away? And once that first choice is made, how fast does it spread? That's the relatable part. Most people can't relate to mansions and private jets, but everyone can relate to silence. We've all seen wrongdoing minimized because confronting it would be messy. We've all watched uncomfortable truths get turned into jokes. We've all seen powerful people get the benefit of the doubt because challenging them has a cost. In the comments, the point kept returning. Predators aren't just predators. They're also products of what surrounds them. Status, fear, money, and a network of people who choose convenience over courage. That's a bleak kind of suspense because it means there isn't a single villain to defeat at the end. The villain is an ecosystem. By the time I finished, I wasn't stuck on any one page. I was stuck on the idea that every system meant to protect people had a moment where it could have worked and didn't. And once you see that, you start to wonder what else is happening right now, in plain sight, waiting for someone to open a file years later and ask, "How did we let this happen again?" Next story. One of the most haunting comments wasn't about a new detail. It was about time. Someone said witnesses had been speaking up for 20 years, sometimes even on public television, only to be ridiculed as crazy. That line made me picture an old clip, a person trying to describe something unbelievable, an interviewer smirking, the audience laughing because disbelief is easier than empathy. The suspense isn't in whether it happened. The suspense is in realizing how long people tried to warn us and how efficiently we trained ourselves not to listen. I imagined what it must feel like to speak up and watch the room turn against you, to be told you're exaggerating, to have your story treated like entertainment, and then, years later, to see documents released that suggest you were telling the truth all along. That twist, being right after being mocked, isn't satisfying, it's devastating, because it means the ridicule wasn't harmless. It was a weapon that helped keep the truth quiet. It's also relatable in smaller forms. Everyone knows the sting of not being believed, a complaint brushed off at work, a warning ignored in a family, a problem minimized until it becomes a crisis. Scale it up, and the consequences become unbearable. If the public won't believe you, and the powerful won't act, what do you do with what you know? You swallow it. You go quiet. You survive. The thread felt like a quiet funeral for credibility. People admitted they'd dismissed earlier warnings. Others said they never heard them because the media framed it as gossip. Some said they believed, but didn't know what to do. That's the cliffhanger. What now? Because the past shows truth doesn't automatically win. It has to be defended, repeated, protected, especially when the other side has money, lawyers, and friends. When I closed the page, I felt a heavy shame that didn't belong to one person. It belonged to all of us. The shame of calling screams noise until a file finally proves we were wrong to laugh. Next story. I promised myself I wouldn't click any links. I was already overwhelmed by people saying they couldn't sleep afterward, that they felt sick, that reading the details changed them. And then I looked down and saw my baby sleeping on my chest. That's when the whole thing stopped being abstract. The screen wasn't news anymore. It was a window into cruelty, and the warmth of my child made that cruelty feel closer, like danger had stepped into the room. My heart started racing, and I hadn't even opened a document. I was only reading strangers' reactions. I wrote a short comment about refusing to open anything for my own sanity, about crying while my baby slept. I expected mockery or silence. Instead, someone replied with a kind of firmness that felt like care. Stop reading. Protect your mental peace. They explained that stress doesn't stay contained. It floods your body, lingers, and babies sense changes you don't even notice. The message wasn't ignore it, it was survive it. I stared at that reply for a long time, because part of me felt guilty. Like stepping away meant I didn't care enough. Like if I didn't absorb every detail, I was failing the people who couldn't step away. But then my baby stirred, made a tiny sound, and settled again. And I understood something simple. There's a difference between witnessing and drowning. There is no ending behind the next link, just more darkness, more outrage, more helplessness. So I closed the tab. No speech, no dramatic goodbye. I put my phone down and listened to my child's breathing until mine slowed to match it. The suspense didn't resolve, and maybe it never will. But in that moment, I chose the one thing I could control. I didn't let cruelty take over my body while I held someone who depended on me to be steady. And for the first time that night, my shoulders dropped, not because the world was safer, but because my home still could be. Next story. In the middle of all the arguing, names, redactions, politics, someone dropped a simple definition that changed the whole story. There's a word for people who see evil happening, have the power to stop it, and choose not to. Complicit. I read it twice because it reframed everything. It wasn't only about criminals. It was about enablers, the people close enough to know, important enough to intervene, and comfortable enough to stay quiet. That idea is terrifying because it's relatable. Most of us will never meet someone like Epstein, but most of us have witnessed wrongdoing in smaller settings. A boss abusing power, a teacher targeting a kid, a friend crossing a line, a family secret everyone pretends not to notice. In those moments, the question isn't, are you the villain? The question is, what did you do when you knew? The suspense is in the quiet scenes the files don't show. The staff member who hears a strange instruction and decides not to ask why. The associate who sees something off and convinces themselves it's none of my business. The professional who senses danger and tells themselves they can't risk their job. The friend who laughs along because confronting truth would cost access. Complicity doesn't look dramatic. It looks like a shrug, a nervous smile, a changed subject, a door closed gently instead of slammed. And once you start looking for it, it explains so much. How secrets last, how redactions protect, how consequences get delayed until the public is exhausted. The most unsettling part is that complicit people often think they're neutral. They call it being practical, staying out of drama. But neutrality only feels neutral to the person who can afford it. To everyone else, it's abandonment. That comment demanded a mirror, not just outrage. It asked a suspenseful question because the answer isn't always flattering. If you were close enough to know, would you have spoken up, or would you have found a reason to stay silent? That's the question that keeps the story from ending, because it's the question that keeps repeating wherever power exists. Next story. The comment was short enough to miss, and heavy enough to change the air. All of the redacted names are still breathing. Redactions are supposed to be boring, legal, administrative, procedural, but that line turned them into something alive. It suggested that behind every black bar, there might be a person who woke up, drank coffee, checked their phone, and went on living, while the public argued about what should be hidden and what should be exposed. That's what made it suspenseful. A redaction isn't missing ink, it's a deliberate absence. Someone decided a name should be protected from whatever consequences might come with recognition. And once you accept that, every page becomes a hallway with locked doors. I tried to calm myself with the fair possibilities. Some redactions protect victims, some protect witnesses, some protect people who were never charged. Those are real reasons. But the frustration in the thread pointed in one direction, that the same tool might be shielding the powerful. People kept repeating a simple standard. Protect victims who want privacy. Yes. Shield perpetrators. No. And yet the black bars remained. That's where the still breathing line cuts deepest. It doesn't just say these people are alive. It implies they're comfortable. It implies the distance between harm and consequence is so wide they can keep living normally. That feeling is painfully familiar in smaller ways. We've all seen someone dodge accountability while someone else carries damage for years. We've all watched a scandal fade and the powerful return to business as usual. I found myself scanning pages the way you scan a crowd for a face you recognize. Black bar, black bar, black bar. Each one felt like a person sitting in the shadows, confident no one could point at them. When I closed the page, the comment stayed, because it wasn't asking for gossip. It was asking for accountability. And the scariest part is not knowing how many black bars there are, how many lives cushioned by silence, how many people still breathing comfortably behind a decision someone made with a marker.